The blue glow of the holographic display cut through the darkness of Ambassador Kim Nari's office like a blade. She sat behind her metal desk, her black hair pulled back in a tight bun, watching as the alien figure materialized before her. Creature's 6 arms trembled as it spoke, its voice crackling through the universal translator with static and fear. Ambassador Kim, the delegate, began, its large eyes reflecting the light of distant stars through the office windows. We come. To you, in our darkest hour? The void swarm has awakened from the deep space beyond our galaxy's edge. Our outer colonies are gone, consumed. We need your help. Kim Nari leaned back in her chair, her face showing no emotion. Behind her, through the massive windows of the orbital station, Earth spun slowly in its ancient dance around the sun. 50 years had passed since that terrible day when humanity was thrown out of the Galactic Defense Coalition. 50 years since the galaxy had pointed their fingers at humans and called them monsters. You cast us out like wild animals, Nari said, her voice as cold as the space between stars. You said we were too violent, too dangerous for civilized beings. You called us monsters who could not be trusted. And now you come here, begging for our help? The alien delegate's image flickered as the transmission wavered. She could see the fear in its eyes, the way its multiple arms shook with terror. Please. Ambassador, you must understand. Swarm is unlike anything we have ever faced. It consumes everything in its path. Our greatest fleets, our strongest shields, our most powerful weapons. Nothing stops them. They grow stronger with each world. They devour. Nari stood up and walked to the window, placing her hand against the cool glass. Below, she could see the lights of Earth's cities twinkling like diamonds in the darkness. 50 years ago, those same lights had dimmed with shame when humanity was forced to leave the galactic community. The Terra Wars had been brutal, yes, but they had been necessary. The galaxy had not understood then. They had called humans savage, unpredictable, too dangerous to be part of their perfect civilization. I remember the day you expelled us, Nari said, not turning around. I was just a young officer then, watching from the gallery as the council voted. 347 votes to ban humanity from all galactic military operations. 43 votes to allow us to remain. The rest abstained, too afraid to even choose a side. The delegate's voice cracked through the translator. We made mistakes. We see that now. Please, Ambassador, entire star systems are being consumed. Billions of lives are being lost. You will lift the ban immediately.
Nice.
We will restore your status in the coalition. We will give you full military honors, technology exchanges, anything you ask for. Nari turned back to face the hologram, her dark eyes studying the desperate creature before her. You speak of mistakes as if they were simple errors in judgment. But they were not mistakes. They were choices. You chose to cast us out when we fought too hard, when we won too decisively, when we showed you what real warfare looked like. She walked back to her desk and sat down, folding her hands in front of her. Tell me, Delegate, what has changed? What makes you think we are no longer the monsters you said we were? The alien's image flickered again, and she could hear the sound of explosions in the background of the transmission. The swarm approaches our core worlds. Our military commanders estimate we have perhaps 6 months before they reach the populated systems. Without help, without your tactical expertise, our civilization will fall. Nari smiled, but it was not a kind smile. You want our tactical expertise? The same expertise you called barbaric? The same methods you said had no place in civilized? Warfare. Yes, the delegate whispered. We were wrong. You see that now? Your people, your warriors? They understood something we did not. They knew how to fight enemies that could not be reasoned with, could not be negotiated with. We need that. Knowledge now. The ambassador stood up again and walked to a different window, one that looked out toward the military shipyards floating in Earth's orbit. In the distance, she could see the construction lights of massive ships being built in secret. The galaxy did not know about these ships, did not know about the technologies humanity had developed during their 50 years of exile. I will present your request to the United Defense Command, Nari said finally, but I cannot promise anything. You see, Delegate, 50 years of isolation has changed us. We are no longer the species you expelled. We have learned much in our time away from your civilized galaxy." The alien's relief was visible even through the crackling hologram. "Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you. We will await your response." "One more thing," Nari said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "When we were cast out, you said we were too dangerous for civilized beings. You may want to remember those words in the coming days." She cut the transmission, and the hologram disappeared, leaving her alone in the darkness of her office. Outside, the stars waited, and somewhere among them, an ancient enemy stirred. The galaxy was about to learn that 50 years of exile had not made humanity weaker or more civilized. It had made them something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The war room deep beneath the mountains of Korea was silent, except for the soft hum of machines. General Park Jawan stood at the front of the long metal table, his gray hair cut short and his uniform pressed sharp. Around the table sat 20 of humanity's most important military leaders, their faces serious. In the blue light of the holographic displays, 50 years, Guan said, his voice echoing in the large room. 50 years since they threw us out like garbage. 50 years since they said we were too violent, too dangerous for their perfect galaxy. What did we do during those 50 years? Pressed a button on the table, and the air above them filled with images that made even these hardened soldiers gasp. Ships that looked like they were made of liquid metal floated in the display. Weapons that bent space itself around them. Soldiers in armor that seemed to shift and change like living things. "We evolved," Juan continued. While they sat in their council meetings, talking about peace and civilization, we worked. We learned. We built. Admiral Lee Minho stood up from his seat halfway down the table. His young face was serious, but his eyes burned with something that might have been excitement. "Show them the Ghost Fleet," he said quietly. The holographic display changed. Suddenly the room was filled with the image of space itself. But this was not empty space. Ships moved through the darkness, but they were almost invisible, like shadows against the stars. They moved in ways that ships should not be able to move, turning and spinning without any visible engines. "These are not the ships they remember," Minho said. "These are not the crude metal boxes we used to fight in. These ships can bend light around them, making them invisible to enemy eyes. They can move through space without leaving any trace. They can strike and disappear like ghosts." Captain Choi Hain leaned forward in his chair. He was older than Minho, but younger than Giwan, with scars on his hands from years of training. "But it's not just the ships," he said. "It's the people inside them. Show them the soldiers." The display changed again, and now they could see human soldiers in training. But these were not ordinary soldiers. They moved faster than normal humans should move. They reacted to threats before the threats appeared. They fought with weapons that seemed to think for themselves. "We took the best of our people," Juan explained. "We gave them training that the galaxy has never seen. We taught them to think. Like the enemy, to predict what the enemy would do before the enemy knew it themselves. We made them into something new." A woman at the far end of the table raised her hand. Colonel Han Sora had been quiet during the entire meeting, but now she spoke. The alien delegate said the Void Swarm adapts to whatever they fight against. "Our old weapons, our old tactics, they won't work." "Exactly," Jiwan said, smiling for the first time. "But we are not using old weapons or old tactics. We learned from our mistakes in the Terra Wars. We learned that sometimes you cannot just hit harder. Sometimes you must hit smarter." The display showed a simulation of a battle. Human ships faced creatures that looked like living darkness, things that moved and changed shape as they fought. But the human ships did not fight like ships had fought before. They worked together like parts of a single mind, each ship knowing what the others would do before they did it. "This is not just about better weapons," Minho said. "This is about becoming something the enemy cannot understand. The swarm adapts to what it fights. But how can it adapt to something that changes faster than it can learn?" The room was quiet. As the military leaders watched the simulation, in the display, the human ships moved like dancers. Never where the enemy expected them to be, always one step ahead of the creature's attempts to adapt. There is one question we must answer, Captain Choi Hyan said, his voice cutting through the silence. The galaxy threw us out. They called us monsters. They said we were too dangerous to be part of their civilization. Now they come begging for our help. The question is not whether we can save them. The question is whether we should. General Jiwan looked around the room at the faces of his officers. Some looked angry, remembering the shame of their exile. Others looked thoughtful, considering the millions of innocent lives that would be lost if they refused to help. Abandoned us when we needed them, said another officer. They watched as we were cast out and did nothing. But if we do nothing now, Colonel Hunsora said quietly, we become what they said we were. We become the monsters. The general walked to the window that looked out over the secret shipyards. In the distance, he could see the ghost fleet preparing. For war, ships that could disappear into nothing. Weapons that could tear holes in space itself. Soldiers who had been trained to fight enemies that did not yet exist. We have become something new, he said finally. Something the galaxy has never seen. The question is not whether we should save them. The question is whether we can save them and still remain human. Outside, in the darkness between stars, the ghost fleet waited. Soon the galaxy would learn what humanity had become during its 50 years of exile. Soon they would understand that sometimes monsters were exactly what you needed. Admiral Yoon Soo-jin stood on the bridge of the Coalition flagship Harmony. Watching the tactical display with growing horror, the golden ships of the Zephyrian Empire had been the most beautiful sight in the galaxy, 10,000 vessels moving in perfect formation, their energy shields shimmering like jewels against the black of space. She had seen them destroy entire pirate fleets without losing a single ship. Now she watched them die. How is this possible? Whispered Lieutenant Kim Tae-yeon, her tactical officer. His young face was pale as he stared at the display. The Zephyrian shields have never failed. Never. They stopped the Crimson fleet at the Battle of Seven Suns. They held against the stellar cannons of the Hegemony War. But the Void Swarm was not using stellar cannons or energy weapons. The creatures moved through space like living shadows, their forms shifting and changing as they fought. They flowed around the Zephyrian energy shields like water around stones, then struck from angles that should not have existed. Sir, came a voice from the communications station. The Zephyrian flagship is requesting immediate support. There. Reporting that their shields are ... changing. The energy patterns are shifting to match the swarm's frequency. Soo-jin felt ice in her stomach. The swarm is adapting to their shields. Not just adapting, the communications officer said, his voice shaking, learning. The creatures are copying the shield technology and using it against them. On the display, she watched as a Zephyrian cruiser fired its main weapon at a swarm creature. The beam of pure energy struck the creature directly, but instead of destroying it, the creature seemed to absorb the energy. Then it fired the same energy back at the ship, using the cruiser's own weapon against it. They're not just fighting, Soo-jin said quietly. They're learning everything about us as they fight. The tactical display updated, showing the crystalline ships of the Nexari arriving at the battle. Their geometric formations were perfect, each ship positioned with mathematical precision. They had studied warfare for thousands of years, turning battle into an art form. It meant nothing. The swarm creatures flowed around the Nexari formations like smoke, ignoring the careful mathematics of their positions. They struck from directions that the Nexari computers said were impossible, attacking through dimensions that should not have existed. The Nexari are reporting total formation breakdown, came another voice from the communication station. Their battle computers cannot calculate the swarm's movements. They're saying the creatures are violating the laws of physics. Soo-jin closed her eyes and tried to remember her training. She had studied every major battle in galactic history. She had learned from the greatest military minds of a dozen species. But nothing had prepared her for this. Sir, Lieutenant Kim said, his voice barely above a whisper. We're receiving a transmission from the swarm. They're communicating? Soo-jin asked, surprised. Not exactly. They single, ... singing. All of them together. It's like they're one mind in many bodies. The bridge filled with a sound that made everyone stop and listen. It was not beautiful, but it was not ugly either. It was something beyond human understanding, a sound that spoke of hunger and growth and the need to consume everything. Enjoying this, Sujin realized, they're not just fighting to survive, they're fighting because they love it. The tactical display showed system after system falling to the swarm. The outer rim colonies were gone. The mid-sector defense stations had been consumed. Now the creatures were moving toward the core worlds, where billions of people lived in cities that had never known war. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving another transmission from Earth. It's the Coalition Council." The holographic display activated, showing the faces of the council members. They looked desperate, their usual calm dignity replaced by fear. "Admiral Sujin," the council speaker said, his voice cracking, "we are prepared to offer humanity full technological exchange, access to our entire database of scientific knowledge, planetary territories in the Outer Rim, full voting rights in the Coalition. Whatever they want." Sujin stared at the council members. These were the same beings who had voted to expel humanity 50 years ago. Same ones who had called humans too violent, too dangerous for civilized society. "They're begging," Lieutenant Kim said quietly. "The people who threw out humanity are begging for human help." Another update came from the tactical display. The swarm was moving faster now, as if the battles were making it stronger. Each ship it destroyed, each world it consumed, seemed to add to its power. "Sir," came a new voice from the sensor station, "I'm detecting movement in the outer system. Something big is coming." Sujin looked at the display and saw them. Ships that appeared and disappeared like ghosts, moving through space in ways that should not have been possible. They were human ships, but they looked nothing like the crude vessels that had been expelled. 50 years ago, the Ghost Fleet, she whispered. The human ships moved with a deadly grace, each one perfectly positioned to strike at the swarm's weaknesses. They did not announce themselves or ask for permission. They simply appeared, like predators, returning to reclaim their territory. "Sir," Lieutenant Kim said, his voice full of awe, "the humans are not running from the swarm. They're hunting it." The depths of space, the Ghost Fleet spread out like a web, ready to show the galaxy what humanity had become during its 50 years of exile. The creatures that had terrified the greatest military minds in the galaxy were about to learn what real predators looked like. The space around Kepler Prime had been empty just moments before. Then, without warning, reality itself seemed to tear open as the human fleet emerged from hyperspace. Captain Kang Do-yeon stood on the bridge of the flagship Retribution, watching as his ships took position around the embattled Coalition forces. These were not the metal boxes that the galaxy remembered from 50 years ago. The human ships moved, like living things, their hulls shifting and changing as they flew. Sometimes they were solid, sometimes they seemed to fade away like ghosts. The Coalition officers watching from their damaged ships could barely believe what they were seeing. "All units, execute Protocol 7, Do-yeon said into his communication device. His voice was calm, but there was something cold in his eyes. Something that had been forged during 50 years of exile. The Void Swarm creatures turned toward the new arrivals, their dark forms rippling through space like living shadows. They had just finished destroying half of the Coalition fleet, and now they moved to consume these new ships. But something was different this time. Lieutenant Jung Minji sat at her station in the Psychological Warfare Center, deep inside the Retribution. Around her screens showed the patterns of the swarm's hive mind. For months, the creatures had moved as one, sharing thoughts and tactics instantly across thousands of individual beings. "Beginning mental disruption," Minji said quietly, her fingers dancing across her control panel. "Target their communication network." The human ships began broadcasting strange signals into space. Not words or images, but something deeper, patterns of thought that confused the swarm's shared mind. The creatures who had always moved together perfectly suddenly began to hesitate. "It's working," Minji said, watching as her screens showed chaos spreading through the swarm's network. "They're getting confused signals. Some are trying to attack, others are trying to retreat. They can't decide what to do." On the main bridge, Engineer Song Woo-bin watched his screens as the battle began. The human ships were not just fighting randomly, they were learning. Every move the swarm made, Every tactic they tried was being recorded and analyzed by the ship's artificial intelligence. "The AI is picking up their patterns," Wubin said to Captain Doyen. "Look at this. When they attack from the left, they always follow up with a strike from above. When they retreat, they always regroup in groups of 7. "Use that knowledge," Doyen ordered. "Turn their own tactics against them." The human ships began to move in ways that seemed impossible. They appeared to be retreating, drawing the swarm creatures forward into what looked like a trap. But when the creatures tried to escape, they found human ships waiting exactly where they needed to go. "How did they know?" whispered Admiral Yoon Sejin from the Coalition flagship, watching the battle unfold. "How did they know exactly where the swarm would try to retreat?" "They're not just reacting to what the swarm is doing," said Lieutenant Kim Tae-young, his eyes wide with amazement. "They're predicting what the swarm will do next." The human ships fought like a single organism, each one knowing exactly what the others would do. But unlike the swarm, they were not controlled by a single mind. They were choosing to work together, and that choice made them stronger. "Target the cluster leaders," Dojan ordered. "Remove their command structure." The human ships focused there. "Fire on specific swarm creatures, not the largest or strongest, but the ones that were giving orders to the others." Without their leaders, the creatures began to fight without coordination, attacking each other as often as they attacked the humans. Sir Minji reported from her station. "I'm detecting panic in their network. They've never encountered an enemy that could disrupt their hive mind before." "Keep the pressure on," Doyan said. "Don't let them adapt." But the swarm was trying to adapt. Song Wubin could see it on his screens. The creatures were attempting to change their tactics, to find new ways to fight. But every time they tried something new, the human AI was ready for it. "They're learning too slowly," Wubin said with satisfaction. "By the time they figure out one of our tricks, we've already moved on to the next one." The battle raged for hours, but slowly the tide turned. The Coalition officers watched in amazement as the creatures that had seemed unstoppable began to fall back. For the first time in months, the Void Swarm was retreating.
Ow.
"This is impossible," said Admiral Yoon, Sujin staring at her tactical display. "The swarm has never retreated before. They always fight until they win or until they're all destroyed." "They're not just fighting," whispered one of her officers. "The humans are thinking 5 moves ahead. They're planning strategies that the swarm won't understand for hours." On the Retribution, Captain Dojan watched as the last of the swarm creatures disappeared into the darkness of space. Around him, his crew worked quietly, already preparing for the next battle. "Sir Lieutenant," Jung Minji said, turning from her station. "We've downloaded their entire communication network. We know how they think now. They know that we know," added Song Wubin. "They're scared. For the first time, they're actually afraid." Doyan nodded slowly. The galaxy had thrown out humanity because they were too dangerous, too violent. They would learn what humanity had become during 50 years of exile. They had not just become better fighters. They had become something that could make even the Void Swarm afraid. The war was far from over. But for the first time, the galaxy had hope. Humanity had returned, not as the crude fighters they remembered, but as something new, something evolved, something that could save them all. The ancient dreadnought hung in space like a diseased heart, its black metal surface pulsing with veins of sickly green light. Colonel Han Sora floated in her combat suit just outside the massive ship's hull, looking through her helmet at the nightmare before her. This was not like any ship she had ever seen. It was alive, breathing, hungry. "This is it," she whispered into her communication device, her voice barely steady. "If we fail here, everything ends." Behind her, the human fleet had formed a perfect circle around the dreadnought. Their ships were working together to create something that should not have been possible, a field that bent time itself. The massive alien ship was trapped in a bubble where time moved differently, but the field was fragile, would not hold forever. "Colonel," came Captain Kong Doyen's voice through the comm, "the temporal field is stable for now, but we estimate you have maybe 30 minutes before it collapses." Hansora looked at the 12 soldiers floating beside her. They were the best humanity had to offer, trained for 50 years to fight enemies that did not yet exist. They would board a ship from a dead galaxy and try to destroy something that had consumed entire civilizations. To her team, this ship is not just a machine. It thinks, it learns. It will try to turn us against each other. Stay focused on the mission. They cut through the hole with weapons that sliced through space itself. Inside, the corridors were twisted and wrong, with walls that seemed to move when no one was looking. The air was thick with whispers in languages that had been dead for millions of years. The central core should be 3 levels down, said Sergeant Park Hyunwoo, checking his scanner. But the scanner was giving impossible readings. The ship's interior defied all laws of physics. They moved through corridors that led nowhere, past rooms filled with machinery that hurt to look at. The ship was trying to confuse them, to make them lost in its maze of nightmares. But the human soldiers had been trained for this? They marked their path with special devices that could not be fooled by alien tricks. There, Hansora said, pointing to a massive door covered in symbols that seemed to writhe and change.
The heart of the ship.
The door opened as they approached, revealing a chamber that was impossibly large. In the center was a pulsing mass of organic machinery, surrounded by thousands of screens showing the death of galaxies. This was where the swarm's intelligence lived, where it made its plans to consume everything. Begin the setup, Hansora ordered. Her soldiers moved quickly, placing explosive devices around the chamber. But these were not ordinary explosives. They were designed to create a chain reaction that would tear the ship apart from the inside. "Colonel," came a voice through the com. It was Captain Lim Jinwoo from the ship Valiant. "The temporal field is becoming unstable. We need to collapse it now, or the dreadnought will break free." Sora looked at her timer. They needed 5 more minutes to finish setting up the explosives. But they did not have 5 more minutes. "Sir," said Sergeant Park, his voice tight with fear. "The ship knows what we're doing. It's trying to stop us." The walls around them began to pulse faster, and the whispers grew louder. The ship was angry, desperate. It was calling to its children, the swarm creatures scattered across the galaxy, but the temporal field blocked its signals. "Colonel," Captain Lim's voice came through the com again. 3 ships will need to sacrifice themselves to collapse the field properly. My ship volunteers to be one of them." Hansora felt her heart stop. The Valiant had a crew of 300 people, good people who had families waiting for them back on Earth. "Captain, there has to be another way," she said. "There is no other way," Lim replied, his voice calm. "This is why we came back. This is why we trained for 50 years, to do what must be done." The explosives were ready. Hansora looked around the chamber one last time, at the screens showing the death of civilizations, at the pulsing heart of the monster that wanted to consume everything. "All teams evacuate now," she ordered. "We're done here." They ran through the twisting corridors as the ship began to scream. The intelligence inside knew it was about to die, and it was calling out in rage and fear. But the temporal field held, keeping its cries from reaching the rest of the galaxy. Colonel Captain Lim's voice came through the com one last time. "Tell them we were glad to serve. Tell them we remembered what it meant to be human." Hansora reached her escape ship just as the temporal field collapsed. The 3 human ships that had volunteered to die moved closer to the dreadnought there, crews saluting as they disappeared into the void. The ancient ship, the source of the swarm's power, was torn apart by forces that existed outside of normal space and time. In the aftermath, the galaxy was quiet. The remaining swarm creatures, cut off from their source, simply stopped moving. They floated in space like empty shells, their terrible intelligence gone. Ambassador Kim Nari stood before the Galactic Council weeks later, her uniform crisp and her voice steady. The same beings who had voted to expel humanity 50 years ago now looked at her with something that might have been respect. "We offer you not just readmission to the coalition," the council speaker said, "but leadership roles, command positions, whatever you ask for." "We accept," Kim Nari said, looking each council member in the eye. "But things will be different now. No species will ever again be cast out for doing what must be done. No one will be called a monster for being willing to make the hard choices. The galaxy had called them monsters 50 years ago. Now they understood that sometimes monsters were exactly what you needed to survive.